Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heller Consulting's webinar. We'll be starting in just a few moments. Give folks a chance to join. Okay, let's get started. Welcome. Today's topic is a virtual panel discussion. Fundraising experts share best practices. Our panelists today are Etan Harmelech of Hillel International, Dr. Anna Pruitt of Giving USA, and Cathy Moore from Heller Consulting. The session will be moderated by Smita Vedakekalam from Heller Consulting. I'm Kaya Swift, also from Heller Consulting, and before we get started, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. All audio lines have been muted to ensure high quality audio. Today's webinar will run until 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And finally, we want this webinar to be highly interactive. We encourage you to ask questions along the way, and if you have a question during the presentation, you can post it in the question box located in your GoToWebinar user interface. The recording of this webinar will be emailed to all registrants and attendees, and it will also be available on teamheller.com. Finally, don't forget to check out our website, teamheller.com, for a number of free resources, including blogs, guides, and webinars. And with that, I will pass the mic over to Smita.
Thank you so much, Kaya. As Kaya mentioned, I'm Smita, and I'll be your moderator for today's panel discussion. I'm very excited to have our panelists here today. But before I introduce you to the panelists, I just want to share with you why we decided to have this particular discussion with these three particular individuals. As some of you may know, Heller Consulting came out with a guide or white paper about a month ago, which explores our perspective as a consulting firm that's been in this field of nonprofit fundraising technology for over 20 years. We share what we've observed in this changing landscape of technology fundraising and what we've seen work and not work in terms of tools and systems that either support and propel an organization's fundraising strategy and mission or hinder them. In the guide, we share some of the trends happening in the charitable sector by referencing the most reputable source out there for charitable giving, which is Giving USA. We share what we've seen in our work with nonprofits and what we've learned from our clients. And so often the world of technology strategists, the practitioners, and researchers are separate. So that's why today I'm really excited. We're bringing all three perspectives to talk about the intersection. And so I'm excited to introduce Dr. Anna Pruitt, the managing editor of Giving USA from the Lilly School of Philanthropy, the researcher. And Anna has extensive and in-depth experience and knowledge in the world of philanthropy, and I'm really excited for her to share her findings throughout this webinar. And then we have Etan Harmelech, the VP of Digital and Direct Marketing at Hillel International, the practitioner. Etan has done some really interesting things at his organization to grow digital fundraising. And I really look forward to Etan sharing his expertise and experience. And finally, we have Cathy Moore, Senior Strategist of Heller Consulting, the strategist. Cathy is one of the smartest strategists I know in this field, and she'll share with us her insights in working with several nonprofit organizations to help them set up their tools and utilize them to meet and exceed their fundraising goals. So I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves and share a little bit about their work. So let's start with Etan. Can you share with us a little bit about Hillel and your work?
Sure. Thanks, Mita. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for joining also. I know it's busy for making time out of your day to come listen to us chat. Yeah, if you're not familiar with Hillel International, Hillel is the largest Jewish college organization in the world. Our mission is to enrich the lives of Jewish students so that they may enrich the Jewish people and the world. Some quick facts by the numbers. We're on 500 colleges and universities, actually more than 500. That's in 17 countries around the world, most of it in North America, the United States, and Canada. We have 1,200 staff members who are working directly with Jewish students on those campuses, and they serve 140,000 students each year. That's a little bit about us, and yeah, I'll pass it back to you, Smita.
Okay, thanks, Etan. Cathy, why don't you go next? Oh, Cathy, you're on mute.
Thank you. Gotta love technology. Thanks. It is really great to be part of this group. I'm excited to hear from my colleagues here, their experience. I've been privileged to be involved in nonprofits most of my adult life, ranging from a volunteer to a staff member. And now as a consultant, I get to work with many nonprofits, and that's been great. I've been with Heller Consulting for the last 3 or 4 years, and I have the opportunity and privilege to work in the 3 areas that you see on the screen, working with nonprofits to develop their overall strategy, to actually implement their technology, and then we get to help implement those technologies successfully by making sure we're ensuring the people come on board with the change.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Cathy. And then finally, Anna, could you share with us a bit about yourself and Giving USA?
Absolutely. So my name is Anna Pruitt. I am managing editor at Giving USA, where the report is actually researched at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. It's the first school of philanthropy in the entire world, and therefore it's the very best. And we not only do research on this report, but many others. So to give you a little bit more information about Giving USA, I hope you're already familiar, but if you're not, welcome. It is the longest running annual report about charitable giving in the United States. Now, we create estimates for charitable giving that are really at the macro level. So to think about it this way, a lot of the other reports that you read are going to be surveys, or even something like Blackbaud, that's 9,000 organizations. Here for Giving USA, we are looking at data for 600,000 organizations in terms of the categories of where charitable gifts are received. That's the little uses arrow that you're seeing there. On the other side of the equation, we have the sources of giving, of course, those individuals, bequests, corporations, and foundations. And those sources of giving are also at the very high level. We're using IRS data in order to create those estimates. And we're not just looking at a handful of individuals, we're really looking at 128 million households in the United States. So this really is the most comprehensive report that is out there for charitable giving. And it has the really interesting part of the report. Not only do we have these estimates, but we also do chapters on all 4 sources and all of the major categories of giving so that we can give some context to those numbers. And I'm excited to share some of those findings with you guys today.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Anna. Great. So let's start with our first question about fundraising trends. Let's start with you, Anna. From your perspective, what are the most important fundraising trends that you think medium to large nonprofits should have their eye on, and why? Can you share with us some of the positive trends and concerning trends?
Absolutely. So top line, number one trend is that philanthropy is not a one-size-fits-all situation right now. It never has been, but right now it's a more complex field than it ever has been before. Last year we saw really uneven results on both the sources side of giving and the uses side of giving. So total giving was about flat, but what we saw is really that foundation chunk. Foundations had a great year. Conversely, we saw actually a decline in giving by individuals. And that's true on the other side of the equation as well. So that just lets us know that philanthropy right now needs solutions that are specific to individual organizations. The next top line finding, the kind of big trends that we're seeing from Giving USA, if you take a look at that big chunk of the pie that says 68% for individuals, 2018 was the first year that we actually saw that fall below 70% since the 1950s. So that is a pretty historic finding. But with that said, it's important to remember that although what we're finding is that fewer and fewer people are donating to charity, that doesn't mean that there's no hope. What we are also seeing is that giving by foundations, not only did they have a great year last year, they've had unbelievable historic growth. We didn't start tracking giving by foundations until the late 70s. Since then, it's gone from the first 5 years that we started tracking foundations, it was about 5% of that pie. Now it is 18% of that pie. So there's been really massive growth. Another takeaway when we look at that 68% for individuals is that's only one way to think about charitable giving by individuals, because, of course, who is making bequests? Well, individuals and households are making bequests. And when we look at that big chunk that's coming in from foundations, we know that 64% of giving by foundations comes from private family foundations. And who's that? Again, that's individuals and households. So when we think about charitable giving from that perspective, when we add up individuals and bequests and the giving that's coming in from private foundations, it's 86% of the pie. So some of those things that you've been hearing your entire life as fundraisers, it's all about relationships, it's all about individuals, that's not going anywhere anytime soon. It's just a matter of how those charitable dollars are being given, what vector they're being given through. And then finally, the third top-level trend that we're seeing is that technology is changing and shaping this field in new ways at every point in the process. So one of the things that's really interesting about Giving USA is we get to have this kind of holistic picture. We see that technology is changing the way that people give. So you guys, I'm sure, have heard a lot about donor-advised funds. Well, one of the things we know about why donors like donor-advised funds, it's easy, and for a lot of them, it's already online and it's already in a platform they're familiar with. For instance, Fidelity, the largest national donor-advised fund sponsor, an enormous percentage of the people who have a donor-advised fund at Fidelity also have a retirement plan there. They're already familiar with that technology. So it's shaping the way people give. It's also shaping where people give. So over on that chunk, that other slide, other pie chart that we have that shows where all of those charitable dollars are going to, we see some of the smaller types of organizations, such as environment and animal organizations. This is, again, a slice of the pie that we didn't start tracking until the 80s. And now it's really pretty large. And something that we also know from having a lot more research in the field is that giving to environment and animal organizations routinely punches above its weight when it comes to online giving specifically. So they're perhaps finding different donors. We see, for instance, at Giving Tuesday, giving to animal and environment organizations is getting 13% of that Giving Tuesday pie. But for Giving USA, that number is still much smaller. So we see that technology might be helping to shift those landscapes overall. And then finally, for those different categories, those different types of organizations, technology is really shaping those jobs. And we know that we're seeing different kinds of titles available at nonprofits. Digital didn't used to be a title that used to be in somebody's job description for a nonprofit organization. And of course, we're seeing that. And increasingly, things like data storage, data service, and keeping donors' information private, those are big issues now for nonprofit organizations. So really, technology is shifting and shaping the entire field of philanthropy. Those are my top 3 findings. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anna. That's really interesting. A lot there. We could talk hours. But I want to ask you, though, can you just talk a little bit more specifically about that, I think 68%, as I saw on that pie, of individual giving, some of the specific trends you're seeing within that individual giving piece of the pie?
Absolutely. So one of the benefits of being here at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy is we have an enormous amount of research from around the field, including things like the Women's Philanthropy Institute. We know from the Women's Philanthropy Institute that women give differently than men. Single women tend to give more than single men to charity, for instance. We also know that the amount of wealth that women have is going up. It's been going up for decades, and it's increasingly going up. And we also know that younger women make more of the decisions when it comes to charitable gifts than their older peers when in marriages themselves. So that lets us know a bit about the importance of thinking of segmenting out your individual populations. How you're talking to women might even be different than how you're talking to your male donors. What we're also seeing is that millennials just think differently in general about charitable giving. not only are they thinking about making gifts to nonprofits, but they might be thinking about giving a gift to a peer through a crowdfunding campaign, and they might also be interested in doing some workplace giving where they want to be working for an organization that allows them to give charitably to a cause that's important to them. So we're really seeing shifts by those different demographic slices throughout the field.
Thank you so much. Wow, that's so interesting. I'm going to ask Etan, from the work you do, how have you seen some of these trends play out specifically at Hillel? And, how have you worked to adapt with what donors are expecting based on some of these trends?
Yeah, I'll definitely affirm that we've definitely seen a rise in donations through donor advised funds over the past couple of years. So that trend is playing out. I'd say from my area of work, which is really in direct response and even leaning into the digital side, we've just seen this proliferation of asks and solicitations and competition for mind share around digital on donors' inboxes and even Facebook and Instagram ads and search as well. And so, it's almost, sometimes it feels like a race to a bottom where, 4 years ago, we sent 3 Giving Tuesday emails. Last year, we sent 5. This year, we're going to send 7. There are competitor orgs or partner orgs that I know that send 10. And so it seems like it's only getting worse before it gets better. But at the same time, we know we don't get if we don't ask. And we've seen, as we do increase volume, even if conversion stays the same or dips slightly, we do see more total revenue in the door. So that's definitely a trend that plays out and is sort of top of mind for me all the time. One other, I don't think Anna mentioned this, and I don't know what Giving USA has to say about it, but just the goal of converting recurring donors and monthly donors is something that I see both in our own organization and elsewhere, because they really are the goal of the low dollar segment if we can get recurring donors in the door. And so that's been a big area of focus both for us and, again, other organizations I talk to. And when we look at competitors, that's a huge area that we're looking at. And then the last thing I'll say is Hillel is, by design, an apolitical organization. And that also, I think, will affect us next year. I've seen some great studies, and we saw it ourselves, that even on the midterms last year as a non-advocacy organization, we just saw our direct response fundraising numbers dip between September 15th and the early November of 2018, and then an immediate rebound after the election and into December. And so we're probably anticipating, that, plus next year. And so thinking about how we manage our acquisition and our solicitations around that time is something we're already thinking about now.
Wow, interesting. Thanks, Etan. I'm going to ask a slightly different question to you, Cathy. Just hearing Anna and, Etan talks about some of these trends that they're seeing. How have you seen technology specifically hinder or aid to support some of these trends?
Okay, great. Actually, it's interesting when Anna mentioned how some of the smaller organizations are really making inroads. The first thing that I thought of was one of the big changes in the nonprofit technology sector has been the huge discounts that some of the big CRM or database organizations are giving to nonprofits, including free licenses for a certain number of people. And so that's really allowed these smaller organizations to leap forward and move faster in some cases than the larger organizations that have a bit more, perhaps bureaucracy or levels to go through to make something like that happen. I call it the democratization of technology. It's becoming available for more and more organizations at a reasonable cost. I think one of the other trends that I'm seeing, and I think Etan touched on this a little bit, and Anna did as well, is we're seeing people give in a number of different ways. And they expect their brands, their corporate brands to be able to do that. They expect us to be able to relate with them based on their entire interaction with a nonprofit. They don't want to, be communicated with about a particular gift, ignoring all the other ways they're involved. The millennials want to be recognized for their volunteer time. Major donors want to be recognized for event participation, etc. So we're looking at the increase of ecosystems that stitch together various systems. And that brings with it some interesting challenges for nonprofits, but it is becoming more and more expected, and so can really make things a little bit more challenging the more sophisticated your fundraising gets.
Wow, thanks, Cathy. It's really interesting. I have so many follow-up questions for you guys, but we have just a little bit of time. We want to make sure that folks who are attending this webinar, here's your chance to ask some questions. We'll be doing this throughout, so just a reminder, you can pop your question in the GoToWebinar panel where it says questions, and Kaya is going to be moderating, and we'll see if any questions have come through, and we'll have Kaya moderate there.
There is one for Anna, so I flip back to the slide. With this pie chart, what bucket do donor advised funds fall into?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one, as you can imagine, we get very often. Right now, the way that we're counting donor advised funds is when someone makes an initial gift to their donor advised fund, it counts into individual buckets. And then we actually net out on the other side of the equation the grants to and from donor advised funds so that we're not double counting. One, like foundations, which also didn't used to be part of the pie chart, it is likely that if donor advised funds continue to grow at the rate that they're growing, we may eventually have to add a new slice of the pie, which, of course, would change things a bit. But right now, it's not quite yet at that level.
Thank you. Kaya, I'm also looking at the questions. I see a follow-up here. I think we have time for one more question.
Yep, I'm pulling this up. It says, can you talk a little bit about the impact of Giving Tuesday? I think that is for everybody.
I mean, I can talk from the organization perspective that we've grown our Giving Tuesday donations 10x over the past couple of years, and it's been a huge area of focus. I think there was a mindset previously at our organization and others. I've heard that it was a fad or that it was too busy a space, and the reality is when you look at the numbers, and I'm sure Anna has perspective here too, is that it's just a continuous sharp incline up and to the right, and I think close to whether $400 million donated this year across all channels. So we've leaned into Giving Tuesday in a big way, more emails, more targeted emails, more segmented emails, certainly social media. This last year we did text to give for the first time on Giving Tuesday and got an excellent response on that. So we continue to try and add more channels, both digitally and through text, and we've seen a great return on it. And the last thing I'll add is just the conversion metrics on Giving Tuesday are so much higher. If email, we usually receive, a 0.07, response rate. On Giving Tuesday, that might be triple.
Huh. Interesting. Thanks, Etan. Anna or Cathy, anything to say about this particular question, or shall we move to? Okay, that's the sign.
I think we both probably do. I don't want to over speak on Cathy, but I'll just add in. So Etan discussed, of course, we are seeing that bump, and there's some early work out that suggests that has actually collected data from multiple organizations for multiple years, brought all that data together, and their early work suggests that there actually is a net increase from Giving Tuesday donations. Of course, it's really hard to study. It's really hard to isolate just one day of giving on most platforms, and it's hard to get everyone to share their data. So that's a bit of a tricky thing to find out. But that is what the early work suggests, which is really exciting. But I think from our perspective at the school, since we're interested in all areas of philanthropy, One of the things we see with Giving Tuesday is it really brings to the fore this idea of the fourth T. We always talk about time, talent, treasure, but also testimony, the importance of just sharing information about your favorite nonprofit or cause can actually really ripple through and have an impact as well. And so that's something we're really interested in here at the school, is how the idea of Giving Tuesday being a giving movement, and a bit sort of even further than just a day of giving, but really focusing on really shining a spotlight on nonprofits and trying to increase generosity overall, which is one of the intended goals of the project, is to really have just a wave of generosity that's just kind of more general. So it's been exciting to see the monetary outputs, and it will be interesting to see if this sort of wave of giving, which has gotten increasingly global, which is really, really exciting, because there's, it's Thanksgiving, the Tuesday after Thanksgiving here in the United States. For everyone else, it's just a Tuesday. So it's actually very cool that around the world, Giving Tuesday has resonated. That means that this idea of celebrating generosity does have kind of a lot of legs, a lot of places to go. So it'll be interesting to see if the movement continues to grow, and kind of what other impacts it has on philanthropy more generally. But for now, we, of course, are interested and excited to see the way that it keeps getting bigger and bigger every year across virtually any way you can count it. So there's more interactions, there's more mentions of Giving Tuesday, there's more uses of the hashtag. All of that is, great for the field.
Great. Thanks so much, Anna. So I'm going to pivot to the next round of questions, which is somewhat related, digital fundraising as giving. I know that's a big way of getting donations via Giving Tuesday. And, it's interesting, before I ask my question, we had some preliminary conversations with this group about digital fundraising. And one interesting thing came up was that we learned that, or I learned that there's not a common definition of digital fundraising. People have different definitions of what digital fundraising means. And that's an interesting in itself. And it seems like it's based on, your level of sophistication and where you are in the spectrum of what you're doing. But for the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to start with the definition. So as we talk about it. So when I talk about digital fundraising in this conversation, we're talking about simply fundraising using digital technology, which usually means fundraising online. And this means usually that fundraisers need to think about how and when people are donating and how they expect to be able to interact with the online process. So with that, Anna, I'm going to start with you. I'd love to hear in your work with Giving USA and watching fundraising trends overall, where does digital fundraising stand currently compared to overall fundraising trends? And what do you see are the biggest shifts or trends within digital fundraising?
Right. So I want to start off by saying that generally digital fundraising, or I guess to get even more specific, gifts given through online platforms are still 8.5% of all giving, according to Blackbaud, and that's something that we're still not able to track through Giving USA, because getting that data is really tricky. And as the kind of the world of fundraising gets more and more sophisticated and more segmented, we have to work directly with those data providers in order to get that data. Unless someone starts putting that on the 990 form, it'll be harder for us to access that. So to return to that data point, 8.5% of all charitable gifts, that may seem a bit small since it's under 10%, but it's growing every year. It was 7.1% in 2017, and over the last 5 years, we've seen nearly 33% growth. So that's encouraging. It suggests that there's room to grow, and that's where the future of fundraising is. One of the things that we know about donors from all of our different projects is that they get into charitable giving habits. So if donors sort of become used to working with an online platform or interacting with an organization online, it's likely that they'll continue to do that. One of the things that's really interesting, though, as you mentioned, in terms of giving a definition, that's increasingly necessary because although we here in the field know what our definitions are, that isn't necessarily the way a donor is experiencing the world. So they may be getting that crowdfunding ask from one of their social media friends and be thinking like, yeah, this comes out of the same bucket as I give to a food pantry and I'm giving to my friends crowdfunding. And for them, it may not be separate exactly, even though from our perspective, one is going to a charitable organization and one is going directly to another person. So we have an opportunity actually, I think, at this moment in the field to think about how we differentiate ourselves as the third sector and how we want to think about the best ways to do that. So here at Giving USA, my job is to keep getting that data, keep letting you guys know what we're finding. But you guys are the ones who are on the ground actually making those connections and making those differences. So I'm interested to hear what you have to say about what you're seeing.
Well, thanks, Anna. Well, then I'm going to pivot the question over to Cathy. Cathy, with a lot of experience in this field, how have you seen the evolution of digital tools available play out with your work with numerous nonprofits? Do you see organizations investing in the resources needed to keep up and do this well?
That's a great question, Smita. I think in terms of evolution, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of solutions that are available out there, and that leads to a need to really understand what's available in each of those tools and make strong decisions about that. We're getting into some technology things that maybe fundraisers weren't as familiar with earlier on. Can a system be up all the time? Are privacy constraints built into it? And so in our work, we're seeing a lot more clients come to us for help selecting a solution, really doing a rigorous process to look at those different tools and identify the best one that will fit within their overall ecosystem. I've definitely seen in the last couple of years an increase in people wanting to get into the new marketing automation tools, more advanced marketing automation tools that really leverage your CRM data. And there feels like there's a bit of an urgency around that right now. People are feeling behind if they don't have those tools. And so it leads to a desire to get on the platform quickly. But people are finding once they do that, they select a tool, it's not as easy as you think it is to just transition over to that digital side of things without a really strong strategy in place.
A really good point. Thank you, Cathy. So I'd love to ask you, Etan, you specifically at Hillel International have grown your digital fundraising program significantly. So love it if you could share with us how you were able to do that, some tips, strategies, and tools you implemented to get there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll be vulnerable and say, when we first sort of took over the program, we realized we weren't even close to that 8%, mark that Anna mentioned. And so on one hand, it was a hill to climb, but the other thing was like, oh, we have room for growth here, which was kind of exciting. So we really focused on 3 areas in terms of growing the program overall. First was audience and really feeding the top of the funnel, knowing that if we just could maintain our same conversion rates, if we grew the top of the funnel, it would trickle down to the bottom line revenue. And so we really focused on growing our email subscriber list through a variety of different methods, and most of it lead gen and lead capture. And so our email audience has increased 10 times over the past couple of years, and that has had a pretty marked transition down to the bottom of the funnel and actual conversions. The second thing was just the cadence of our communications. Like, we didn't really have regular communications, both in terms of solicitations and appeals and in stewardship. So just by simply, instituting a monthly newsletter for some stewardship, we took a concept that, from direct mail, which is a renewal series, and ported that over to digital with great results and a higher conversion percentage than a typical appeal. Just those regular cadence of asks and solicitation and stewardship made a pretty big difference. And then the last thing was actually the content of our messaging. we just didn't have a ton of urgency to give. And as we talked about in this like increasingly crowded and competitive environment, especially, I would say over the past few years, that's picked up. It's tough to compete when there's not an urgent need to give. And unfortunately, in our world, in the Jewish world, safety and security and combating anti-Semitism is a hugely important area, and an area of work where we spend a lot of time and energy because we need to keep our students safe. I mean, we weren't talking about that at all. And once we started talking about it and applying it to our solicitations and appeals, we noticed that made a huge difference as well. So it's really those three factors combined have led to the results you see on the screen there.
Great, thanks so much, Etan. I think we have some samples to share of this.
Yeah, I should give a hat tip to Cathy because we've been working with Hillel since migrating over to Salesforce. And yeah, it's personalization and customization is really important and expected, I think, from donors. So, in terms of some examples, we tried to, that's a personalized header for actually not a donation request, but a different type of email, just with personalization of first name. And we use, we use a company called Nifty Images, really like low dollar and low barrier to customizing emails in new and exciting ways, and actually have dynamic content like based on giving levels and previous giving history. And so that's made a big difference too. Actually, if you go to the next screen, I mentioned that renewal series. So this is an email about renewing your gift today. It's pretty small, hard to see, but we customize by first name, and then we also personalize by ask amount. And then we personalize an ask string further down based on the highest previous household contribution. So being able to tailor our fundraising emails and requests to our donors certainly has helped as well.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing those examples. Those are helpful. I'm going to hand it over to Kaya. Again, we're going to pause. And for those of you in the audience, if you have some questions specifically about digital fundraising and other things, we're going to pause for some questions for our panelists.
The first one is for Etan. How many people are on your team, and what are their various roles to accomplish what you've done?
It's a great question. We started 2 years ago as a team of 0, and now we're up to a team of 4. And I like to think that investment by our organization in that area speaks to some of the importance of it. And so in terms of roles, we actually, I manage the team, and then we really segment out by campaign rather than focusing on one channel. So for instance, I have two assistant directors for digital campaigns, and they're versed in how to create Facebook ad campaigns and audiences, which also works on Business Manager. Ads Manager also works on Instagram. They're also like really well trained in creating creative for email and content for emails on Salesforce Marketing Cloud, and also segmenting those audiences. And they're also great creatives who can design using Canva, InDesign, and Adobe Photoshop. So they have the whole Adobe suite. So we really look at like a cross training. But I do know other organizations who break it up where they have specifically an email fundraising expert and a social media fundraising expert. But with our size team, we don't feel like we're quite there yet.
Great. Another one that we have is what are some other definitions of digital fundraising that exist in the field?
You guys can certainly weigh in on this from Hillel Consulting. I'm sure you get all kinds of things. But something that we've noticed, some of the conflations that can occur are for things like cause marketing, which a lot of times donors don't necessarily make a distinction between buying something and then where, you buy a pair of shoes, the pair of shoes goes to someone in need, something like that, versus traditional philanthropy. Donors don't necessarily make that distinction. And as mentioned, one of the things that's really interesting about crowdfunding campaigns is that we have all kinds of people using this platform. So we have people giving to other individuals, Then we have people giving to nonprofits, which is, of course, what we're talking about here today, but we also even see people giving to businesses. So there's a really wide range of possibilities out there. And again, especially here, for people who are this level of specialized, perhaps that seems nuts that people wouldn't necessarily be marking those differences. But if you think about it, it's someone asking for basically a donation. So for a lot of times, donors aren't necessarily making that distinction. And sometimes, you know, I read so much in this field, and the way that different segments of the field refer to it is quite different. Another thing I'll just briefly mention is that, for instance, some organizations like Blackbaud refer to online revenue, and that actually has a different meaning on a 990, because you can get charitable revenue from a number of different ways when you're a nonprofit. You can sell your services, for instance. So that's really different from actually somebody making a donation, a charitable donation by an individual. So those are some of the slippages that I've seen in my work, but I know there's plenty of other complications out there.
That's a great point you just made there about online revenue. We're starting to see that with a lot of our clients, distinguishing between their online and offline revenue. I think one of the different perspectives I've seen with people is some confusion between digital fundraising and digital transformation, where digital transformation typically tends to mean getting everything into a digital world and really looking at that holistic customer experience or constituent experience. So some people will include the offline connections of that and looking at the overall donor journey. And then I also hear people talk about integrated fundraising or cross-channel marketing fundraising. I think that's something Etan's team does really well. But really integrating that message across all of those different channels. And, Blackbaud has had numbers on this for years that you see increased giving the more channels you communicate with people in. So not forgetting that workhorse of direct mail and really leveraging that with similar messaging across channels. So can be part of digital fundraising if you approach it from a campaign perspective. And people will receive the mail piece, but give online. So that's where the technology can really start to help if you're able to track attribution of a campaign and the different touch points that people had and where the money actually came in.
Wow.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot there to that. We get into a whole discussion about how we track that and the data points with that. Well, head spinning. Etan, anything to add, anything from your experience to expand that confusing definition of digital fundraising, anything you've seen?
No, I think we go with the first definition you laid out. I will just piggyback quickly on Cathy's point about, we see the lifetime value of a donor is about 2.5 times when they donate through multiple channels, offline and online. So we are really interested and have pursued those types of donors over the past couple of years.
Well, great. Thank you. We will go to the next round of questions. I would love to hear all of you from your various perspectives answer this question in particular. Interested, I know, Heller Consulting, we're in this every day, but love to hear, Anna from the field, research and what you're seeing across the sector. How would you answer this question? How does technology aid or hinder fundraising goals and strategy? And now, is technology part of the conversation more than ever, or is it the same? Just curious to hear your perspective on that.
Well, undoubtedly, technology is part of the conversation more than ever. We've been talking a bit about Giving Tuesday since it's right around the corner, and I think that Giving Tuesday is a great kind of case study for how technology can aid and hinder fundraising. On one hand, all the time, you see those stories from Giving Tuesday where a smaller organization earns its entire year's worth of fundraising in one day on Giving Tuesday, and they're able to really amplify their message, and we see those case studies, which is amazing. And that really does have incredible potential something Cathy touched on earlier as well. Cathy, you have so many great phrases. I've been writing them down. True wordsmith, I love it. But you talked about the democratization of of technology, and you know, we're learning more and more that places like Facebook are actually manipulating their algorithms so that some of those smaller organizations, which typically wouldn't have a very broad kind of audience, are able to do so. They're actually, that's one of the ways that they can help, that Facebook can help give back, is to raise the visibility of these organizations, which I think is so interesting and raises a lot of questions. So that potential for the democratization of giving is definitely there through technology, and I think we see that in Giving Tuesday by seeing the great successes of all these small organizations. But I think it also tells us that there's some potential pitfalls there as well. So one of the issues is that we do know that as Giving Tuesday has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, bigger and bigger chunks of dollars are going to those larger organizations that people already know. And there is some research out there that says that when people are faced with a lot of different requests coming in at them from lots of different organizations, the great news is they tend to give more. Yay! The news that's a little less exciting is they tend to give to organizations that are super widely recognized. So there's something to do there with just getting too many requests and people processing that. So this idea that a potential pitfall is that even though it's intended to democratize giving, it might go the other direction and allow larger organizations to kind of box out some of those smaller organizations. With that said, and then another part is that technology plays an outsized role in something like Giving Tuesday. So when you're putting so much pressure on one 24-hour period, if something happens with your giving platform that's kind of out of your control, you face potential losses that may be difficult to be recouped. So there's some questions there about relying so much on technology and then not necessarily knowing what to do if something goes wrong, and thinking about how we can, as a field, address some of those things. So I think one of the things we're seeing from some organizations is that they're Giving Tuesday is the culminating event, but they're actually increasing giving, that kind of giving period, for like a week or two, so that they're hopefully diminishing some of that risk. So great potential, also some pitfalls, and it'll be very interesting to see kind of how the movement develops.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. We definitely see some of that in the work we do as consultants. Etan, I would love it if you could answer this question from your perspective, and an add-on for you. I'm just curious, at Hillel, how have you seen, your team have to increase, or folks at your organization increase its technical knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's all about having the right audience in place first and foremost. And I think back, I've worked at organizations that do have a CRM, but I've also worked at organizations that don't, and it's night and day for me. And to me, that's about being able to deliver the right message to the right person at the right time. And that's where technology for me has made a huge difference at for Hillel, where we know when a lapsed donor is about to expire, and without actually raising a finger, we can make sure that person then gets an email in their inbox, and Facebook message, if we were really doing a great job, sent directed toward them right at that moment, to let them know that it's been a year since their last gift, or they haven't given this year, and now's the time to do it. And so that's a big deal. And yeah, we have, our team has certainly had to grow our technical knowledge about the back end of our database. And I'll say, we about 6 months ago, we hired an amazing Salesforce administrator, and that's made all the difference. To have partners on the technology side who really understand both, the database inside and out, and then also the use case for us as frontline fundraisers, makes all the difference, because then we can really accomplish everything we want to, which is, as fundraisers, it's always, we want to do everything. So I do think, yeah, we've had to learn more, but also trusting our partners internally and externally is a big deal for us.
Right. Thanks so much, Etan. Cathy, I know you have a lot of opinions on this particular topic, so love to hear what are your thoughts on how does technology aid or hinder fundraising goals and strategies? What have you seen?
Yeah, I've already heard some great things from my co-panelists. I definitely think technology is a bigger part of the conversation. And in fact, I think sometimes what we're seeing happen is that clients will come to us saying, I need a new online giving solution, or I need a new email marketing tool, thinking that is going to solve their problems. And so it's having to remind people to come back to the strategy that is actually going to make those tools effective. The technology is just an enabler. You can't solve a fundraising problem with technology. You still need the strategy that goes behind that. And it's easy to think in today's world that technology will solve problems. The personalization that Etan mentioned, I think these integrated platforms that have multiple solutions that are stitched together, that bring all that data together and give us that view, really enable that. But the flip side to that is, if your data isn't clean, if you're not actively managing your duplicates, you can run into trouble really quickly. If, in Etan's situation, if you've got 3 versions of a major donor in the system and you're trying to email them when their annual gift is expiring, they could get 3 different emails. So Etan mentioned his great partners on the other side. They do a great job of managing that data, but it's actually sometimes hard to convince people that it's worth investing in keeping that data clean until something goes wrong. So we do get a lot of organizations that come to us and they have 100,000 duplicates in the system, and they don't know where to start, how to manage that. And so it's an important thing to think from the beginning of when you're starting to adopt this new type of technology. I also, Anna's story about the explosion of emails, it makes me think about in earlier days when celebrities started to get really involved in fundraising, and somebody might go on the Ellen show and promote a particular nonprofit, and their website would crash because so many people would go and visit it on that day. This is just a new version of that challenge, and the technology companies are putting more and more effort into creating stabilized platforms. And I think the business solution is exactly what Anna said, is those periods are becoming longer, which means we need more content, and that content needs to be the right content for the right person at the right time. The more we segment and the more we can collect stories. I loved your 4th T, the testimonials. Those stories are such an important part of how we can motivate people to give.
Oh, thanks so much, Cathy. Some of what you talk about sounds familiar to me, so definitely can. We have a little bit time for a few questions, so you can post your questions in the panel, and we'll wait for a question or 2 from Kaya.
Okay, we have advice to those who are new to the fundraising profession. How do we go about learning about technology and how it impacts the profession of fundraising?
I can give a quick plug for one resource in addition to, I'm sure, the great resources that Giving USA has. And there is an organization called the Nonprofit Technology, or I know they're n10.org, I forget what it stands for. But they have an amazing suite of resources for nonprofits and a whole section for fundraisers. And they also have, I think it's a 10-week intensive digital fundraising course that's all taught online, that's relatively inexpensive, I think in the hundreds of dollars, that if someone wanted to dive in, they could do that and come out on the other side 10 weeks later. I've done it, a couple members of my team have done it, and it's been super helpful.
I was going to give the exact same example. It is a great resource and really cost effective for nonprofits. I think, at the end of the day, I'm self-taught when it comes to technology, and one of my favorite things to do now is actually sign up for webinars and watch them. Even if I can't attend them, I'll watch the recording. And you can actually learn a tremendous amount, even from a vendor, demonstrating a solution. You get great ideas and great ideas about new strategies that you can try. And so that's kind of a second level for me, is expanding that knowledge of strategies that you can use.
I will add that also, if you're new to the profession, and I can relate because I started in fundraising, and usually if you're starting at the very beginning in an entry level area, you usually have an opportunity to get your hands on technology. And so I would encourage, if you're new to the profession, and nowadays I don't know if you can avoid it, to be honest with you, but if it is of interest, then take initiative. And what we've seen is there's always room for improvement. So if you have that initiative to learn more about the system that your organization uses, get in there, and I'm sure you'll find many ways to improve the existing system. If your organization is going through an implementation or trying to think about new systems to support, like, get involved with that project. From whatever, you don't, even just from the, being a stakeholder that understands how this tool can further your organization's goals and missions. So that's some other tips or strategies. So we're just towards the end. I want to make sure I ask my last question here for our panelists. Looking ahead, I would love to hear about, just from each of you, what some advice you have for nonprofits for looking ahead at 2020. So Anna, we'll start with you, and any advice this year based on Giving USA's latest report? What should nonprofits be thinking about? What are some of the things that?
Right. So this is a very big question. What I think nonprofits should be thinking about is keeping up to date, because there are some real genuine unknowns. Things are shifting right now. So this is the second year of tax reform, and we don't know exactly if the biggest change happened last year, or if some people weren't fully aware that they weren't going to be itemizers, and this year they are aware. So we are still waiting to see how exactly that's going to shake out towards the end of the year. As I'm sure many of you have heard or read somewhere, there is a general fear of recession. We're not there yet, though. So keeping abreast of that is really important. And then, of course, finally, the changing policy landscape. Things like the TCJA, tax policy may not be the reason you got into nonprofits. That's not why tax is not the reason why most people go to learn about nonprofits, but it nevertheless does have its big impact on the field. So really paying attention to that policy landscape. So one of the other panelists had briefly mentioned political giving. Typically, political giving does not crowd out charitable giving on a broad scale in a lot of the studies that exist, but now things are different. And people are giving more online now to political campaigns than they ever have. So that might be shifting things. So I would just say, keep going to webinars, keep staying informed, find the places, the sources of information that you trust, and stay up to date, because there are a lot of genuine unknowns.
Thanks so much, Anna. We have so much to talk about, but Etan and Cathy, can you give some quick tips? Just we're nearing the end of the hour of what you would say, or what your organization is doing to think ahead for 2020.
Yeah, I'll be real quick, and I'll say, one thing we're doing is really focusing on acquiring more new donors into our system, and it's an area where for a few years we didn't invest as much as we should. We just saw donor numbers fall off, and that really impacts the number of donors downstream at the major level also. So really, remembering to retain and steward our donors, but also knowing we need to invite more people in the door is really important, and a big area of focus for us for 2020.
And I think from my perspective, Kaya and I put some tips together in terms of solving that challenge of how to keep your data clean across the platforms, because it's becoming more and more of a critical issue for people as more platforms become part of your ecosystem. So really understanding how the data flows, one way, two way, understanding what your duplicate landscape looks like and how you're going to manage that. I'm seeing more and more nonprofits have dedicated staff for data hygiene to keep that data clean and make sure that the information that's going out is correct, being much more thoughtful and careful about how putting people into a communication journey is impacted by these different things of data changing and duplicates being merged. And I think one of the things we've really seen Hillel be successful with is being more targeted, really keeping your list clean, pulling people off if they're not active subscribers, increasing your deliverability rates, and really understanding your data and making the best out of it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Cathy. Well, I'm sorry there's no time for questions, but thank you panelists so much. This has been incredibly insightful, helpful, and I learned a lot in this conversation. I just want to plug two really cool resources we talked about. The slide before, Anna talked about Philanthropy Outlook. It is free and it's available. It talks about projections and it comes out in January. So I think it's out there for 2019 and 2020. So be sure to check that out. It's a wonderful resource. And then last, the guide that I mentioned, the guide that we wrote, which really propelled this discussion, that's available on our website. A look at the evolving world of CRM through the lens of fundraising best practices. And if you have any questions or want to continue this conversation, you can email at info@teamheller.com. Otherwise, I just want to thank our panelists for this incredible conversation and discussion, and thank you to the attendees who came, and you'll be receiving a reminder of a recording of the webinar, and it will be available on our website. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Mita.